"Pack your bags, your sister needs this house," Mom demanded, sliding a fake eviction notice. "Family comes first," Dad sneered. Then my lawyer appeared, and their faces fell apart. Imagine pouring the best years of your youth into building a sanctuary, working until your bones ache and your vision blurs, only to have the people who gave you life try to hand the keys over to the sister who spent her entire life tearing you down. My name is Valerie. I am 28 years old, and I work as a senior financial analyst. But before I am any of those things, I am the owner of the estate on Elmwood Drive. Calling it a house doesn't quite do it justice, and I don't say that to brag. I say it because every single square foot of that property was bought with my own blood, sweat, and absolute isolation. It is a sprawling 4-bedroom property sitting on half an acre of manicured lawn, complete with a wraparound porch where I drink my coffee every morning. Inside, the floors are dark, polished oak. The air always smells faintly of cedar wood and expensive vanilla candles. I even converted the largest guest room into a custom library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a reading nook that catches the late afternoon sun perfectly. This estate is not just an investment to me. It is my armor. It is the physical manifestation of my independence against a world, and specifically a family, that always treated me like an afterthought. When I walk through those heavy oak front doors and hear the satisfying click of the deadbolt sliding into place, I am safe. I am untouchable. No one can make me feel small in a castle that I built with my own 2 hands. For the last 3 years, I have lived in absolute peace. I paid my mortgage on time, well above the minimum required amount. I painted the walls whatever color I wanted without asking for permission. I enjoyed the profound, beautiful silence that only comes when you don't have to share your space with toxic energy. I thought I had finally escaped the gravitational pull of my family's dysfunction. I thought the physical distance, the boundaries I had quietly set, would be enough to protect me. But toxic families do not respect boundaries. They see independence as a challenge. They see your success not as something to celebrate, but as a resource to be harvested when their golden child inevitably runs out of luck. I just didn't realize how far my parents were willing to go. I didn't realize that in their minds, everything I owned was simply a backup fund for my older sister. I never imagined that the very people who were supposed to protect me from the harshness of the world would conspire to throw me out onto the street just to keep my sister comfortable. To understand the absolute insanity of what happened at that restaurant, you have to understand the dynamic between me and my sister, Vanessa. Vanessa is 32 years old, and she has never, not for a single day in her life, experienced the concept of a consequence. Growing up, our house was divided by an invisible but solid wall of favoritism. Vanessa was the golden child, the princess placed on a pedestal so high she couldn't even see me standing in her shadow. I was the glass child, the scapegoat, the backup plan. Let me paint a picture for you. On Vanessa's 16th birthday, my parents, Richard and Diana, threw a massive party and surprised her with a brand new, silver sedan wrapped in a giant red bow. They told her it was a reward for being such a bright light in their lives, even though she was nearly failing math. When I turned 16, 2 years later, I woke up to a clearance rack birthday card and a bus pass. My father, Richard, gave me a stern lecture about the importance of building character through public transportation. When Vanessa went to college, my parents covered everything. Tuition, rent, sorority dues, and a generous monthly allowance that she mostly spent on designer bags and weekend trips. When it was my turn, my parents suddenly discovered the virtue of financial independence. They sat me down and explained that they simply couldn't afford it, and that taking out student loans would teach me the value of $1. So, I learned the value of $1. I learned it by working 80 hours a week between my classes. I learned it by eating cheap ramen noodles in a moldy, basement apartment while my lungs rattled from the dampness. I learned it by having silent, suffocating panic attacks at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I was going to pay for my textbooks. I missed out on parties, on dating, on the entire college experience because every waking moment was dedicated to surviving and securing a high-paying job. And while I was drowning in stress, Vanessa was getting married. A $50,000 dream wedding, paid in full by the bank of Mom and Dad. She married a guy named Derek, a man who enabled her worst habits. They bought a house they couldn't afford, leased cars they didn't need, and had 2 children within 3 years. My parents constantly praised Vanessa for giving them grandchildren, holding her up as the perfect family woman, while casually asking me when I was going to stop being so career-obsessed and selfish. I swallowed the bitterness. I didn't scream, I didn't throw tantrums. I just put my head down and worked harder. I climbed the corporate ladder with a ruthlessness born from the fear of ever being poor again. I saved every bonus, drove a beat-up used car for 10 years, and invested aggressively. When I finally bought my estate, putting down a 20% cash deposit in a terrible housing market, my parents didn't say congratulations. They just asked why a single woman needed 4 bedrooms and hinted that it was a bit showy. Of course, a lifestyle built on credit cards and entitlement eventually crumbles. 6 months ago, Vanessa's marriage to Derek spectacularly imploded. It turned out that maxing out 5 credit cards and hiding the debt from your husband is a great way to end up in divorce court. Derek filed for divorce, fought for custody, and forced the sale of their heavily mortgaged house. Vanessa, left with absolutely nothing but a mountain of retail debt and 2 kids, ages 6 and 8, had to move back into Richard and Diana's basement. The golden child had fallen from grace, but in my family, Vanessa's failures were never her fault. They were always the result of a cruel world mistreating her. My phone started blowing up with frantic family group chat messages. Endless paragraphs from my mother about how poor Vanessa was suffering, how the basement was too cramped for the children, how Derek was a monster. I kept my responses polite, brief, and completely unhelpful. I offered sympathy, but I absolutely refused to offer money. I knew that opening my wallet to Vanessa was like pouring water into a black hole. Then, the invitation arrived. Aunt Evelyn, my father's sister, was turning 70. Aunt Evelyn was the only person in that family who ever looked at me with genuine warmth. She was sharp, independent, and had never bought into my parents' worship of Vanessa. The invitation was for a Sunday afternoon lunch at the Grandview restaurant, the most expensive, exclusive spot in the city. A heavy, cold knot of dread formed in my stomach the moment I saw the location. My parents were notorious for staging their most dramatic family interventions in public places, believing that the presence of strangers would force everyone to behave and agree with them. I had a terrible gut feeling that this lunch wasn't just about celebrating Aunt Evelyn. But I loved my aunt, and I refused to let my paranoia ruin her milestone birthday. I decided to go. I put on a sharp, tailored navy dress, grabbed my keys, and drove toward what would become the most defining nightmare of my adult life. The Grandview restaurant is the kind of place that smells like old money and expensive cigars. The private dining room my parents had booked featured dark mahogany walls, heavy velvet curtains, and a massive crystal chandelier that cast a cold, sharp light over the long banquet table. When I walked through the double doors, the ambient noise in the room immediately dropped. 23 relatives were already seated. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents. As I stepped inside, the whispered conversations abruptly stopped, replaced by the clinking of silverware and forced, overly loud greetings. I could feel their eyes tracking me as I walked toward the only empty chair left, strategically positioned right in the middle of the table, directly across from my parents and Vanessa. Vanessa looked terrible, playing the part of the tragic victim to absolute perfection. She was wearing an oversized sweater, her hair was a messy bun, and her eyes were rimmed with red as if she had been crying for days. Beside her, my mother, Diana, kept patting her hand with aggressive sympathy. I sat down, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. I smiled at Aunt Evelyn, who sat at the head of the table. She gave me a tight, concerned nod. The air in the room was thick, almost suffocating. It didn't feel like a birthday celebration. It felt like a tribunal. It felt like I was a piece of meat tossed into a cage of starving lions. We barely made it through the appetizers before the trap was sprung. My father, Richard, stood up. He picked up his water glass and tapped it with a silver spoon. The sharp clinking sound cut through the room, commanding immediate silence. He cleared his throat, puffing out his chest with that familiar, authoritative arrogance he always used when he was about to lay down the law. "Before we celebrate Evelyn's 70th, Richard announced, his voice booming off the mahogany panels, "Diana and I have a crucial matter of family business to address. As you all know, our sweet Vanessa has been put through hell recently. She has been left destitute by a cruel man, and she is struggling to provide a stable environment for her beautiful children." My stomach plummeted. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I stared at my plate, watching the butter melt on a piece of bread, praying to any god that would listen that he wasn't about to say what I thought he was going to say. "Family," Richard continued, pacing slowly behind Vanessa's chair, "is about sacrifice. It is about the strong stepping up to carry the weak. It is about sharing our blessings so that the bloodline survives and thrives." He stopped directly across from me, his eyes locking onto mine with an icy, unforgiving glare. "Valerie, we need to talk about your living arrangements." My father reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope. He didn't toss it. He placed it flat on the pristine white tablecloth and slowly, deliberately, slid it across the table. It passed the salt shakers, past the floral centerpiece, and stopped exactly an inch from my water glass. "Go ahead," my mother, Diana, urged. Her voice was dripping with a sickeningly sweet, poisonous tone. "Open it, sweetheart. It is for the best." My hands were trembling so badly I had to hide them under the table for a second. I took a slow, deep breath, reached out, and picked up the envelope. I broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't from a bank or a court. It was written in my father's sharp, blocky handwriting. At the top, heavily underlined, were the words, "Notice to vacate." I stared at the letters until they blurred. "What is this?" I asked, my voice sounding incredibly small, almost like a child's. "It is exactly what it looks like," Richard said firmly, sitting back down and crossing his arms. "You have 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate the Elmwood estate. Vanessa and the children will be moving in on the 1st of next month." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words hit me like a physical blow. I literally lost my breath for a second. "You want me to move out of my own house?" I gasped, looking back and forth between him and my mother. "The house that I bought? With my own money." "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Valerie," Diana snapped, dropping the sweet tone instantly. "You are a single woman with no children and no husband. You are rattling around in a massive 4-bedroom estate all by yourself. It is incredibly selfish, frankly, to hoard all that space when your sister is forced to raise her children in a basement." "It's not hoarding, it's my property." I shot back, the shock finally giving way to a boiling, righteous anger. "I worked 80 hours a week for 5 years to afford that down payment. I pay the mortgage. You have absolutely zero right to tell me to leave." Vanessa suddenly buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, theatrical sob. "I told you she wouldn't care, Mom. I told you she hates me. She would rather see my babies out on the street than give up her luxury lifestyle." "Your babies aren't on the street, Vanessa. They are living rent-free in a fully furnished basement," I yelled, my professional composure completely shattering. Richard slammed his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. "Do not speak to your sister that way. We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. You owe this family, Valerie. You will sign the house over to Vanessa to ensure those children have a proper home, and you will go rent a nice, small apartment downtown near your office." It makes perfect logistical sense. They had planned this perfectly. They knew exactly what they were doing by ambushing me in front of the entire extended family. They were relying on the suffocating pressure of mob mentality to crush my resistance. And right on cue, the echo chamber activated. Uncle Mitchell, a man who had filed for bankruptcy twice, leaned forward, pointing a greasy finger at me. "Listen to your father, Valerie. A house is just wood and bricks. Family is forever. You should be honored to help your sister in her time of need. Don't be greedy." Aunt Cynthia, who always looked at me like I was a disappointment, shook her head in exaggerated disgust. "I just don't understand your generation," she muttered loud enough for the whole table to hear. "So obsessed with money and status. A young, single girl has absolutely no business living in an estate like that anyway. It's unseemly. You should be focused on finding a husband, not playing real estate tycoon. The noise level in the room began to rise. Multiple voices overlapping, a chaotic symphony of guilt trips, shaming, and absurd demands. They were rewriting reality right in front of me. In their twisted narrative, I wasn't a hardworking woman protecting her hard-earned assets. I was a greedy, heartless villain hoarding a mansion while poor, innocent Vanessa suffered. I looked at Vanessa. She peeked through her fingers, assessing the room's reaction. There were no actual tears on her face. Just a cold, calculating look of entitlement. She actually believed she deserved the keys to my house just because her own life had fallen apart. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Cousin Cameron, Vanessa's biggest supporter, had pulled his smartphone out of his pocket and was pointing the camera directly at my face. The little red recording light was blinking. He was filming my reaction. He was trying to catch me screaming or crying so they could use it against me later, maybe show it to Derek in court to prove how unstable my side of the family was. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. The edges of my vision went dark. It was a panic attack, the first one I had felt in years. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of hypocrites. These people didn't care about my 80-hour work weeks. They didn't care about my sleepless nights. They didn't see me as a human being with rights and feelings. They saw me as a bank vault, and they were trying to bully me into handing over the combination. I was completely, utterly isolated. If you are enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps the video reach more people, and I appreciate you so much. Now, let's get back to the story. I did not scream. I did not flip the table or throw my glass of water in my father's face, even though every single nerve in my body was begging me to do exactly that. Instead, I stood up. The scraping of my chair against the hardwood floor sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence of the private dining room. I looked at my mother, who was already forming her next manipulative sentence, and I simply turned my back on her. I picked up my purse, ignored my father's booming voice ordering me to sit back down, and walked straight out the heavy oak doors into the hallway. I needed air. I needed a barrier between myself and the suffocating reality of what my family had become. I practically ran to the women's restroom at the end of the corridor, pushed the door open, and locked it behind me. The bathroom was immaculate, all marble countertops and soft golden lighting, completely at odds with the brutal psychological warfare happening just 50 feet away. I leaned heavily against the edge of the sink, gripping the cold stone until my knuckles turned bright white. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to fight off the crushing wave of a full-blown panic attack. My chest felt tight, my breathing was shallow and rapid, and the ringing in my ears was deafening. For a terrifying, weak moment, the little girl inside of me wanted to surrender. A dark, insidious thought crept into my mind. What if I just sign the paper? What if I just give them the estate? Maybe if I sacrifice the most valuable thing I have ever owned, they will finally love me. Maybe they will finally look at me the way they look at Vanessa. It would be so easy to just stop fighting, to give in to the overwhelming pressure and buy my way into my family's good graces. But then I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw a 28-year-old woman who had survived years of emotional neglect. I saw the dark circles under my eyes from the 80-hour work weeks. I saw the tailored dress I had bought with my own hard-earned promotion bonus. I remembered the smell of the damp mold in my college basement apartment. I remembered the sheer terror of staring at a negative bank account balance while my sister posted photos of her luxury vacations. I remembered the day I turned the key in the front door of my estate for the first time, the overwhelming pride of knowing I had built a fortress for myself. The weakness vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, sharp, and absolute fury. I was not going to let them steal my sanctuary. Not today, not ever. I pulled my phone out of my purse with shaking hands and opened my messages. I typed out a frantic text to my real estate attorney, Nathan Cole. I wrote, "Family ambush at Grand View Restaurant. They slid a fake eviction notice across the table and are trying to force me to sign my estate over to my sister. 20+ witnesses. Being threatened. I need help." I pressed send and held my breath. It was a Sunday afternoon. Lawyers do not work on Sundays. I expected to get an automated out-of-office reply, leaving me completely alone to face the firing squad. But less than 30 seconds later, the 3 little typing bubbles appeared on my screen. Nathan replied. "Do not sign a single piece of paper," the text read. "Do not agree to anything verbally. I am at the Oakwood Country Club having a late brunch. It is exactly 3 blocks away from you. I am paying my tab and walking over right now. Give me 10 minutes. In the meantime, check your email from last Thursday. And Valerie? Breathe. We are going to bury them." While I stood in that marble bathroom waiting for my heart rate to return to normal, I opened my email app and searched for Nathan's name. As the loading icon spun, my mind drifted back to a Tuesday morning exactly 1 year ago. It was the day I officially closed on the Elmwood estate. I remembered sitting in Nathan Cole's sleek, modern office overlooking the city skyline. The room smelled of expensive leather and fresh coffee. On the massive glass desk in front of me sat a stack of papers thicker than a phone book. I had spent hours signing my name on dotted lines, transferring a massive 20% cash deposit from my bank account, effectively draining my life savings to secure the property. I was exhausted, terrified, but incredibly proud. Near the end of the meeting, Nathan had pushed a specific, separate folder toward me. He was a sharp, perceptive man in his early 40s, the kind of lawyer who noticed everything. Throughout the process of purchasing the house, he had asked routine questions about my family and emergency contacts. I had been vague, but my hesitation and the complete lack of financial support from my parents had painted a clear enough picture for him. "Valerie," Nathan had said, leaning back in his leather chair and steepling his fingers. "You are buying a highly valuable asset entirely on your own. Given what you haven't explicitly said about your family dynamics, I am going to strongly advise you to add these 2 riders to your closing documents. The first is a premium title fraud protection policy. The second is a legally binding coercion clause." I had frowned, picking up the heavy, legal jargon-filled document. "What does that mean?" "Coercion. It means," Nathan explained patiently, "that if anyone, specifically a family member, ever attempts to force you to transfer the deed, add their names to the title, or vacate the property under emotional distress, blackmail, or intimidation, the transfer is automatically voided. Furthermore, any sudden attempt to alter the deed will trigger an immediate alert to my office and to a private fraud investigation firm. It is a digital and legal fortress around your house." At the time, I had actually laughed. The idea seemed so wildly paranoid. My family was toxic, yes. They were manipulative, hypocritical, and deeply unfair. But they were not criminals. They were middle-class people who cared entirely too much about their public image. "Nathan, I appreciate the thoroughness," I had told him, "but my parents aren't going to hold me at gunpoint for a 4-bedroom house. It feels like an unnecessary expense." Nathan hadn't smiled. He had looked at me with a sad, knowing expression. "In my line of work, Valerie, I have seen blood relatives do unimaginable things for a lot less than a piece of prime real estate. You have worked too hard to leave the back door unlocked. Just sign the paper. Consider it an insurance policy for your peace of mind." I had signed it just to humor him, barely reading the fine print, and completely forgot about it the moment I walked out of his office. Now, standing in the restaurant bathroom staring at my phone screen, I finally opened the email Nathan had sent the previous Thursday. The subject line read, "Urgent, suspicious title activity flagged." I skimmed the contents, my blood turning to absolute ice. They hadn't just ambushed me today. They had been plotting this behind my back for days. Nathan wasn't just walking over here to give me legal advice, he was walking over here to drop a bomb. I smoothed down the front of my navy dress, took one last deep breath, and unlocked the bathroom door. The walk back down the corridor felt entirely different this time. I was no longer a terrified prey animal being backed into a corner. I was simply a woman waiting for her lawyer to arrive. When I pushed the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room open and stepped back inside, the hostility in the air was thick enough to choke on. They had been stewing in their own anger for the 10 minutes I was gone. The moment I sat back down in my chair, my mother lunged forward across the table, her manicured nails digging into the white linen. "Did you call someone?" Diana demanded, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of the sweet tone she had used earlier. "Who were you texting?" "You are hiding something, Valerie. You always were a deceitful, ungrateful child." She actually reached across the table, trying to snatch my purse, but I smoothly pulled it out of her reach and placed it firmly on my lap. "I am not hiding anything," I said, my voice deadpan, completely stripped of any emotion. I stared directly into her eyes, refusing to blink. "I am simply taking a moment to process the fact that my parents just handed me a fake eviction notice." My father stood up again, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He hated it when he couldn't control a situation through sheer volume. "You listen to me, you arrogant little brat," Richard hissed, pointing a finger an inch from my nose. "If you do not sign this house over to Vanessa today, you are finished. I will write you out of the will. I will make sure no one in this family ever speaks to you again. You will be dead to us. Do you understand? Dead." Normally, a threat like that from a father would break a daughter's heart. But I just looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but mild disgust. "Okay," I said simply. The single word threw him off balance. He blinked, expecting a fight, expecting tears, expecting me to beg for his love. "Okay," he repeated, his voice faltering slightly. "Yes, okay," I continued, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. "If that is the price of keeping my own property, then I accept those terms." Vanessa let out a loud, dramatic gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically stabbed. "You are a monster," she cried out, looking around the table at the relatives to gather sympathy. "My children are going to be living in a damp basement, and you sit there looking smug. How can you be so incredibly heartless? You don't even deserve a house like that." Uncle Mitchell chimed in, pounding his fist on the table. "You are a disgrace to the family name, Valerie. You should be ashamed to show your face in public." I let them talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to explain my side of the story. I just sat there in absolute silence, watching them unravel. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Cousin Cameron leaning in closer, his phone still actively recording every single second of the interaction. He thought he was capturing my downfall. He had absolutely no idea that he was meticulously documenting an organized conspiracy to commit fraud. I glanced at my watch. 9 minutes had passed. Any second now. Right as Aunt Cynthia opened her mouth to deliver another self-righteous lecture about the duties of a younger sister, the heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung open. Everyone at the table, all 23 relatives, whipped their heads around, clearly expecting the restaurant manager coming to tell us to keep the noise down. Instead, Nathan Cole walked in. If my parents had been expecting a stereotypical, terrifying corporate lawyer in a stiff three-piece suit carrying a leather briefcase, they were entirely disappointed. Nathan strolled into the room looking like he had just stepped off the 18th hole at a luxury country club. He was wearing a high-end, crisp white golf polo, tailored khaki trousers, and expensive loafers. He had a pair of aviator sunglasses hooked onto the collar of his shirt, a massive silver watch on his wrist, and he wasn't carrying a single piece of paper. He was simply holding a sleek black iPad. His casual appearance stood in stark, almost insulting contrast to my father's stiff, formal suit and desperate need to command the room. Nathan exuded the kind of quiet, effortless authority that only comes from genuine wealth and absolute legal certainty. He didn't look angry. He looked mildly amused. "Excuse me," Richard barked, puffing out his chest and stepping toward the door. "This is a private family event. You're in the wrong room, buddy." Nathan didn't even flinch at my father's aggressive tone. He smiled a perfect, relaxed smile and walked straight past my father, heading directly toward my seat at the center of the table. "I highly doubt that," Nathan said, his voice calm, smooth, and carrying perfectly across the silent room. "I am looking for Valerie." "Ah, there you are." He stopped next to my chair and placed a reassuring hand on the back of it. Then, he looked up and swept his gaze across the sea of confused, hostile faces. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Cole. I am Valerie's real estate and asset protection attorney. She texted me saying there was a slight misunderstanding regarding her property on Elmwood Drive, so I decided to skip dessert and walk over to clear things up. An attorney? Diana gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. She looked at me with pure venom. You brought a lawyer to a family birthday lunch? You really are a paranoid, sick girl. She didn't bring me, ma'am. I invited myself. Nathan corrected her politely. He glanced down at the table and spotted the plain white envelope and the single sheet of paper sitting next to my water glass. Without asking for permission, he picked it up. He read the handwritten notice to vacate in silence. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound in the room was Vanessa's forced, quiet sniffling. Then, Nathan let out a genuine, loud laugh. He pulled his iPad from under his arm, tapped the screen, held the piece of paper up, and snapped a high-resolution photo of it. "What do you think you are doing?" Richard demanded, his face reddening again. "Put that down. That is private family correspondence." Actually, Nathan chuckled, dropping the paper back onto the table as if it were contaminated. Legally speaking, this is toilet paper. It has absolutely no binding authority whatsoever. In fact, if you try to enforce this piece of garbage, it crosses the line from a bad joke into criminal harassment. So, before we go any further, I need everyone in this room to understand a very simple, undeniable fact. Valerie is the sole legal owner of the estate. None of you have any rights, claims, or privileges to that property. Is that clear? The absolute certainty in Nathan's voice sent a ripple of unease around the table. The relatives who had been shouting at me just 3 minutes ago were now shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, suddenly very interested in their water glasses. But my father was too arrogant to back down in front of an audience. "You listen here, Mr. Cole," Richard sneered, stepping closer to Nathan in a pathetic attempt at physical intimidation. "I don't care what kind of fancy legal mumbo-jumbo you want to throw around. We are her parents. We provided for her, we raised her. She owes her sister this house. We are simply keeping family assets within the family. It is a private matter, and we will handle the paperwork ourselves." Nathan stopped smiling. The casual, golf-playing persona vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp, ruthless attorney I had hired. He set his iPad down on the table, leaning forward slightly. "Keeping family assets within the family?" Nathan repeated, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal edge. "Is that what you call what you did last Thursday afternoon, Richard?" My father froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and gray. My mother, Diana, let out a sharp, genuine gasp, her eyes darting nervously toward the exit. "That's right," Nathan continued, turning the iPad so the screen faced my parents. On the screen was a scanned copy of an official county document. Did you really think Valerie was naive enough to buy a multi-$100,000 estate without setting up a digital tripwire? Last Thursday, at exactly 2:45 in the afternoon, someone walked into the county clerk's office and attempted to file a quitclaim deed. This document attempted to forcefully add Richard and Diana to the title of Valerie's property, claiming it was an administrative error during the initial purchase. The room erupted into shocked gasps. Aunt Evelyn, sitting at the head of the table, covered her mouth in horror. Even Vanessa looked momentarily stunned, realizing her parents had gone completely rogue behind the scenes. "The signatures on this document," Nathan said, tapping the glass screen of the iPad, were forged. Someone practiced Valerie's signature and tried to steal a massive percentage of her equity behind her back. Because of the premium title protection policy I had Valerie sign a year ago, the clerk system instantly flagged the document as fraudulent and blocked the transfer. I stared at my parents, feeling a cold, hollow sensation in my chest. They hadn't just ambushed me today. They hadn't just tried to use guilt and mob mentality to get what they wanted. They had actively, maliciously tried to forge my signature to steal my house. They were thieves. The people who raised me were literal thieves. "You have no proof it was us," Diana cried out, her voice trembling with panic. "Anyone could have filed that paperwork. It was probably a scammer. A scammer who coincidentally wanted to give the house to Valerie's parents?" Please, Diana, don't insult my intelligence, Nathan replied coldly. But you are right about one thing. I don't have the definitive proof right here in this room. That is why I brought a digital witness. Nathan picked up his iPad, minimized the forged document, and opened a video conferencing application. He tapped a button, and the screen dialed out. The ringing sound echoed through the silent dining room. After 3 rings, the call connected. The screen displayed a woman sitting in a stark, heavily secured corporate office. She was wearing a headset and a sharp blazer, looking incredibly professional despite it being a Sunday afternoon. Nathan tapped a button on the iPad to cast the video call directly onto the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall of the private dining room, normally used for corporate presentations. Suddenly, this woman's face was looming over the entire family. "Good afternoon, Mr. Cole," the woman said, her voice crisp and amplified by the television speakers. "Good afternoon, Samantha," Nathan replied. He turned to face my parents. "Richard, Diana, Vanessa. I would like to introduce you to Samantha Hayes. She is a senior forensic fraud auditor for the title insurance company that holds the policy on Valerie's estate. Samantha, could you please confirm the status of the file we discussed?" "Certainly," Samantha said, looking down at a file on her desk. "Last Thursday, our automated coercion alert system was triggered by a fraudulent quitclaim deed filed at the county office regarding the Elmwood property. We immediately pulled the security camera footage from the clerk's office. The footage clearly identifies a man and a woman, matching the descriptions of Richard and Diana, presenting the forged documents to the clerk." My father collapsed into his chair as if his legs had suddenly vanished. He stared at the television screen, his mouth opening and closing silently. Furthermore, Samantha continued, her tone strictly business, because this incident involved an attempted, unlawful transfer of property valued over several $100,000. It automatically triggered a federal fraud alert. Our legal department has already compiled the evidence. But that is not the only irregularity we found during our background sweep. Vanessa, who had been completely silent, suddenly started shaking her head frantically. "No, no, no, stop," she muttered, shrinking back into her seat. "Miss Hayes, please proceed," Nathan instructed. During our routine audit of the individuals attempting to claim the property, Samantha read from her screen, we discovered a cross-reference in the state housing database. 2 weeks ago, Vanessa submitted an application for emergency, state-funded housing assistance, claiming extreme financial hardship and impending homelessness. There is nothing illegal about needing help. Vanessa screamed at the television, dropping the victim act entirely and showing her true, aggressive colors. "There is nothing illegal about needing help," Samantha agreed calmly. "There is, however, something highly illegal about committing perjury on a government form. On the application, you listed your current residence not as your parents' basement, but as the 4-bedroom estate on Elmwood Drive. You claimed you were being unlawfully evicted from that property by the owner, Valerie, in an attempt to fast-track your application and secure a larger payout from the state. That is textbook housing fraud." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb having just gone off. My family had constructed a massive, intricate web of lies, forgery, and federal fraud, all operating under the arrogant assumption that I was too weak and stupid to ever catch them. They thought they were untouchable because they were family. They were wrong. "Thank you for your time on a Sunday, Samantha," Nathan said smoothly. "My pleasure, Mr. Cole." "The legal department is standing by for your instructions," Samantha replied, before the screen went black. Nathan turned off the television, placed his iPad back onto the table, and looked at the terrified faces surrounding him. The trap had officially snapped shut. The mob mentality that had been so aggressively aimed at me just 20 minutes ago evaporated instantly. The relatives who had been pounding on the table, demanding I surrender my house, were now physically leaning as far away from my parents and sister as humanly possible. Uncle Mitchell, who had called me a disgrace, was staring at the tablecloth, sweating profusely. Aunt Cynthia wouldn't even make eye contact with anyone. They were suddenly realizing that they were sitting in a room full of federal criminals, and they wanted absolutely nothing to do with the fallout. Then, There was movement at the end of the table. Cousin Cameron, the one who had been so eagerly recording my presumed humiliation on his smartphone, slowly lowered the device. His face was the color of chalk. He looked at Nathan, swallowed hard, and spoke in a shaky, terrified voice. "Mr. Cole, sir?" Cameron stammered, holding his phone out like an offering. I have the whole thing recorded. From the moment Uncle Richard handed her the fake paper. I have them threatening her, demanding the house. I didn't know it was illegal. I swear to God, I just thought it was family drama. If I give you the video, will I be kept out of this? Am I an accessory? You little traitor. Richard exploded, lunging forward, but Uncle Mitchell actually grabbed his arm, pulling him back down into his seat. "Shut up, Richard," Uncle Mitchell hissed, panic completely overriding his loyalty. "You're going to get us all thrown in prison." Nathan looked at Cameron and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "If you email that raw, unedited video file to my office email address right now and agree to testify that Valerie was coerced and threatened today, I will personally ensure that your name is left out of any police reports regarding conspiracy to commit fraud." Cameron didn't hesitate for a microsecond. He tapped his screen frantically, his fingers flying across the glass, and hit send. "Done. It's sent. I want nothing to do with this. I'm so sorry, Valerie. I really am." I didn't even look at him. I was focused entirely on the three people sitting across from me, my father, my mother, and my sister. The golden child and her enablers, completely stripped of their power, their lies exposed to the harsh light of reality. Nathan walked around the table and stopped directly behind Richard and Diana. "Here's the reality of your current situation," he said, his voice cold and precise. "You have attempted to forge a deed, you have attempted to extort property through intimidation, and you have committed state housing fraud. If I make one phone call to the district attorney right now, Richard and Diana, you are looking at a minimum of 2 years in a federal penitentiary for grand theft forgery. Vanessa, you are looking at prison time for welfare fraud, which guarantees you will lose custody of your children to Derek." Vanessa let out a guttural, terrifying wail, burying her face in her arms and sobbing uncontrollably. This time, the tears were absolutely real. It was the sound of a spoiled child finally hitting a concrete wall of consequences. "Please," Diana begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She looked at me, her hands clasped together in desperate prayer. "Valerie, please. We are your family. You can't send your own mother to prison. We made a mistake. We were just trying to help Vanessa. Please have some mercy." "Mercy?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the room like a razor. "Did you have mercy on me when you slid that fake eviction notice across the table? Did you have mercy when you tried to forge my name and steal the house I worked myself half to death for? No. You don't get to ask for mercy now that you've been caught. So what happens now?" Richard asked, his voice entirely broken, the arrogant patriarch completely destroyed. "Now," Nathan said, pulling 3 thick, stapled documents out from under his iPad and tossing them onto the table. "You have 2 choices. Choice 1, I call the police and you all leave this restaurant in handcuffs. Choice 2, you sign these cease and desist orders right now." The documents hit the table with a heavy thud. Nathan didn't wait for them to ask questions. He simply dictated the terms of their surrender. By signing these documents, Nathan explained, tapping the papers, you are legally admitting to the attempted fraud, and that admission will be held in a secure escrow account at my firm. You are legally binding yourselves to completely surrender any and all future claims to the Elmwood estate or any other asset Valerie ever owns. You are agreeing to a permanent, non-negotiable no-contact order. If you text her, call her, show up at her house, or attempt to disparage her reputation to anyone, the escrow file goes directly to the police, and you go to prison. Furthermore, Vanessa, if you have a single piece of clothing or a toothbrush stored at Valerie's property, you have exactly 48 hours to remove it under the direct supervision of an armed security guard I have already hired. Do you understand? There was no negotiation. There was no room to argue. Richard, Diana, and Vanessa stared at the papers like they were venomous snakes. But the threat of a jail cell is a highly effective motivator. With trembling hands, sobbing openly in front of the entire extended family, my father picked up a pen and signed his name. My mother followed, her tears staining the ink. Finally, Vanessa scribbled her signature, practically hyperventilating. Nathan gathered the documents, checked the signatures, and slid them smoothly into his iPad case. Excellent. A wise choice. I stood up from the table. I felt lighter than I had in 28 years. I looked around the room at the pale, terrified faces of my relatives. Then I looked at the 3 people who had made my life a misery. This lunch is over, I said clearly. I am paying for the private room and the food that has already arrived. But I want everyone to pack up their things and leave immediately. Everyone, that is, except Aunt Evelyn. Evelyn, if you'd like, we can move to a quiet booth in the main dining room and actually celebrate your birthday. Aunt Evelyn, who had remained silently horrified through the entire ordeal, gave a slow, proud smile and stood up. I would love that, Valerie. Very much. My parents and sister gathered their coats in absolute, humiliating silence. They didn't look at me as they walked out the double doors. They scurried away like roaches fleeing the light, their absolute defeat witnessed by every single person they had tried to use against me. That was a year ago. The fallout from that Sunday afternoon was brutal and permanent. Because the title insurance company had flagged the fraud attempt, my father's credit score was completely destroyed. When he tried to refinance his own home to pay off Vanessa's massive debts, the bank denied him instantly. They're drowning in interest rates. Vanessa's situation ended exactly as Nathan predicted, minus the prison time. Derek's divorce lawyers somehow caught wind of the housing fraud application, probably tipped off by a gossiping relative, and subpoenaed the records. The judge was so appalled by her attempt to commit perjury and steal her sister's house that Derek was awarded full, primary custody of the children. Vanessa gets supervised visits every other weekend. She still lives in the basement. As for me, cutting the cancerous tumor of my family out of my life was the greatest financial and emotional decision I have ever made. Without the constant drain of their manufactured drama, my career skyrocketed. I secured a massive promotion, and I am currently on track to pay off the mortgage on the Elmwood estate 5 years ahead of schedule. Last month, I received a package in the mail from Aunt Evelyn. It contained a beautiful, handwritten letter and a collection of rare, first-edition books that belonged to my grandmother, passed down to me because I was the only one who actually appreciated their worth. My parents and sister chose greed over blood. They made their choice, and now they have to live with the consequences of that Sunday afternoon. But sometimes, in the quiet moments of the evening, walking through the halls of the estate I paid for with my own sweat, I look back at how ruthless I had to be. So tell me, am I wrong for not giving them a second chance? Should I accept their forced apologies, or was cutting them off entirely the only way to survive? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of standing up to toxic family members. Leave your thoughts down below. I read every single comment. Until next time, stay strong and protect your peace.